Welcome, friends, to Manly Monday with YourOtherBrothers.com. We're navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. My name is Tom, and I am the co-founder and editor of Your Other Brothers, also known as YOB, for those that aren't aware of the lingo and the vocabulary just yet. Today, we are having yet another episode of Manly Monday, our both bi-weekly and bi-monthly, and breaking news, also semi-monthly, but more on that in the mailbag later in this video. If you've been following Manly Monday from the start, you know that I've been going through our 5 values, the 5 values we have at Your Other Brothers. You can learn more all about them, yourotherbrothers.com/about. And I have talked about each of these already. Hope, humility, brotherhood, courage, and vulnerability. And you can go back on our YouTube channel or on our blog and watch any of those videos. You can go to also yourotherbrothers.com/video to watch any of our Manly Monday videos. So if you're interested, if you're new to Manly Monday, if you're new to Your Other Brothers, welcome. We're glad to have you. I'm glad to have you. The series continues. The series doesn't end. We are continuing on with a new chapter in Manly Monday. And I'm excited to get manly with you today on Manly Monday. So as a believer, as a person of faith, as someone who follows Jesus, I feel like a good place to start with this new Manly Monday, this new era, post-values. Not that we don't have values anymore, but anyway. Post 5 values of Your Other Brothers, I figured we would dive into Scripture and talk about the Scripture in my life. I'll just give my perspective on Scripture. And for those that are already familiar with my story, this may be a little tedious, but I grew up in the church, grew up in a Christian family, went to Christian school my whole adolescence, middle school, high school. I went to a Christian college, my first year of college as well, and was in church my whole life. I went to father-son programs at my church and VBS in the summers, went to a summer camp with my church one year. I mean, to say that I was constantly in the Christian bubble is almost an understatement. I was like in a bubble within the bubble of Christianity, and as such, saw the Bible and saw references to Scripture all throughout my life. And honestly, for a lot of times, especially growing up into college, I think Scripture just became not necessarily numb to me. I wouldn't necessarily put it in those terms, but I guess there was an ordinariness to it. There was a familiarity to Scripture that I just didn't have the life experience, maybe away from it or in a new situation outside of my bubble, to recognize the power that Scripture holds. And so there was a time after college when I was a young adult just trying to be out on my own and make my faith my own, where I had this idea that I would start memorizing Scripture. And instead of just random verses, because I had tried that in the past and didn't really succeed all that well, I figured, why not memorize an entire chapter of the Bible, or why not memorize an entire book if I really want to be ambitious? And at that time, I was ambitious. I was so ambitious. And as I was looking through the Bible for an entire book, because that was my goal, I wanted to memorize an entire book of the Bible. Obviously, I didn't want to memorize Psalms or something that's totally impractical. But I was looking in the New Testament and came across Philippians, which wasn't too short, wasn't too long. It was 4 chapters long. And I was like, honestly, if I can memorize 1 chapter, I could memorize 4. I could do that times 4 and memorize Philippians. And so there was a period of time for weeks. I called it Philippiansing at the park. And I would go to this park by my house and just open up the Bible, open up Scripture, and try to memorize a verse every day, an extra verse every day. So starting with Philippians 1 and going 1:1, 1:2, 1:3, etc. And honestly, for, I don't know, a few weeks, I feel like I made some really good progress. I remember there was a time where I had those first 10 to 15 verses, that the first half of Philippians 1, pretty well memorized. And it was it just flowed out, and it felt really good, actually, to have that much under my belt. In Philippians, I've always had a soft spot for Philippians because it's just such a hopeful, encouraging book in the midst of adversity, and I feel like my life has always been in the midst of adversity. So I go to Philippians time and time again. So to start memorizing it was huge. But then I'll never forget a friend who encouraged me in my endeavors, because I had mentioned on my blog, I have my own blog, and I mentioned on social media at the time that I wanted to try to memorize the book of Philippians. I wanted to try. And I remember a friend, I distinctly remember, I don't know if it was a text or a message or a comment or where it came from, but my friend told me, don't try to do it, just do it. If you want to memorize the book of Philippians, tell yourself, I'm going to memorize the book of Philippians, I will memorize this book of scripture. And it kind of harkens back to Yoda from Star Wars. Today, as I film this, it's actually May the 4th, Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you, my yobbers. Harkening back to Yoda's words, do or do not, there is no try. The whole point of it being like, if you want to do something, do it. Make the effort and take the initiative to do it rather than try, which I've kind of realized over the years, I use that word a lot. It'll come up in everyday conversation at least. I mean, I don't even know. If I counted the number of times I use try in the day, I'd probably be super discouraged, because I use the word try. Like, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to go for a run. I'm going to try to finish this writing project by this vague date out there. And I think the problem with the word try is that it is so vague. You can put one little ounce of effort, or even not any. You can say, I'm going to try something in the back of your mind and then just never put any effort to it. And I've noticed that in my life when I started to say, I'm going to try to memorize this book, ultimately that goal fizzled out. And I've noticed that play out in lots of goals, writing related, relationship related. When I say I'm going to try this or try something out or try for a little while, what that really translates into is I'm just going to stop at some point, because eventually that vagueness is going to fizzle out. And so you can apply that to scripture memorizing. You can apply that to sexuality and temptations. Like, there have been times in my life where I said I would try not to look at porn for the day or the week or the month or whatever. And it's just so vague, and there's no definitive way to chart that and map that. And so what I've done actually in my life, and y'all feel free to make this switch. Maybe it'll work for you. I'm not saying it's been 100% effective, but I think it's been way more effective using this 3-letter word than this 3-letter word. So I've been exchanging the word try with the word aim. And I find that when I use the word aim, like I'm aiming for something, I find that it's becoming less vague. I see something on the horizon that I want to shoot for, and I keep my eyes on it. And of course, I'm not perfect, and of course I'm going to mess up, and I'm not going to be perfect in my pursuits and endeavors. But when I say I'm going to aim for something, like I'll use last year as an example, I aimed that I would write my second book, and I aimed that I would go on a little mini trip around the country, and I aimed that I would quit my job, and I aimed that I would do probably 3 or 4 like really significant things by the end of the year. And by the end of the year, I accomplished all of them. Not to like toot my own horn or anything, but I think, because I'll actually contrast that with the previous year where I wanted to try to like move by a certain date, or I wanted to try to, do this with my book or with my writings or other goals. And ultimately those things got tabled and tabled and tabled, and they never materialized. So I would encourage you guys, if you want to make a switch in your spiritual lives, if you want to get some things done and just achieve goals in all areas of your life, exchange the word try for aim. Have an aiming goal and target that you're shooting for. And some days are going to be more successful than others. But get back up every day and aim. When you wake up in the morning, I try to do that. Oh my gosh, I just did it, see? I try to do that. I say the word try so much. I really do want to get like people do those little rubber band things and they like snap it against their wrist when they do something or say something that they shouldn't. I really want to do that with try. Goals. So aim to do that. As I aim to do that every morning when I wake up, I have this 20 or so minute gap between alarms in the morning, and I'll pray during those 20 minutes, and I'll also aim. Like, what am I aiming for today? What are my goals for that day? What do I want to accomplish spiritually, starting there, and then relationally, task-wise with writing and other goals for the day. And I just go through in those 20 minutes between alarms and just start the day correctly. Hopefully on a better trajectory than if I was just trying in some vague sense of the word. I still feel like a failure most days. I don't want to say all days. I don't want to be that depressing. I still feel like a failure most days, and I feel like a hypocrite very often. But ever since making this shift from try to aim, I feel more driven. I feel more purposed. I feel less shame and guilt, I think, when I do mess up, because I know my ultimate goal is set, and I'm striving every day to reach those goals and to reach those aims rather than this vague trying. So today's scripture that I wanted to reference comes from that book of Philippians, a verse that I once memorized alongside 10 or 15 others around it. And it comes from Philippians 1:6. And I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So hold on to that truth today, y'all. If you feel like you're on top of the world and you're doing great in your life and your spiritual walk, or you feel like you're in the valley and you're in the chasms below, wherever you are in between, take heart, set your aim on Jesus. Set your aim with goals that he has for you, that you have in your own life, in your career, in your relationships. And every day, just shoot for it, knowing, believing, hoping that completion and fulfillment, redemption, total, complete redemption will be there. And that's hard for me. Like, I think I mentioned this in my hope video, that hope is really hard for me, and I have to consciously, like, literally write it. I wrote it on my wrist. And hope is hard. Hope is hard to hold on to. But let's do it together. Let's aim together. So for discussion, you can comment on this video on YouTube, or go to yourotherbrothers.com/video and find this Manly Monday episode. I want to hear from you guys. How have you felt like a total failure in your spiritual life? The things that keep tripping you up that you feel like there's no escape from. I'd love to hear some stories of how you've felt like a failure, and then this whole notion of trying. What are your thoughts on that? Have you ever taken to heart Master Yoda's words about doing or not doing instead of trying? How effective or not effective has that been? Because for me, yeah, it's been reasonably effective making that mental shift, going from try to aim. But I encourage y'all to try it out if you haven't. See what happens. All right, it's now time for the State of the Yob, where I go around and poke around the website and see what's been going on at yourotherbrothers.com. Starting with our blog, you can go check out all of our posts at yourotherbrothers.com/blog. Starting with a post from Jacob, who wrote a post called "Where I Feel My Deepest Hunger," talking about the bread of life and Jesus feeding the 5,000 and how that applies to his life and his attractions, his relationships, and the things that he hungers for in his life. Really love his vulnerability. Check out that post from one of our newest bloggers, Jacob. And then Dean wrote a post called "What if I took my sexuality to God in prayer?" And just talking about the simple notion of prayer and how oftentimes a lot of people, and Dean puts himself at the top of the list, kind of save prayer for a last resort, or maybe a fourth or fifth resort after trying lots of other things first, instead of going directly to the source, going directly to God at the beginning, at the start of that process. And it was a really good reality check for me, because I realized, yeah, I kind of do that myself. I don't pray first thing when something happens. I tend to either worry or analyze the situation in my head, or talk to people, or freak out, or, you name it, instead of going to God right away in prayer. So really great, honest post from Dean, who, by the way, works at a church in ministry. Like, I love a humble attitude. Humility, y'all. Check out Dean's post. And then most recently, we have a post from Eugene called "When the Masculine Ideal Failed Me." And gosh, this one hit home because he talks about going away, moving out of his parents' house and moving out somewhere to live with a bunch of dudes, and how he had, I think it was his first time doing so, or one of his first times doing so. And he moved out, and he had this vision and this expectation for, like, what his roommates would look like, the people that he'd be living with, and had these, like, super high hopes that, they'd be super masculine, they'd bond together, do manly things, and have, like, vulnerable conversations and vulnerable quality times together and all this stuff. And as you might surmise, didn't quite turn out that way in this story. And I remember from my own life going to that Christian college my first year, I had such high monumental expectations for my roommate, and I was part of a suite with 4 rooms. And so I had this huge expectation that, like, we would all be best friends and groomsmen in each other's weddings one day, and like these ridiculous idealistic things that never panned out. I'm not in touch with any of those people to this day. I wasn't in touch with them that whole year that I was with them, really. So yeah, so it's kind of a down post for a lot of it, but it's all harkening back to what is masculinity, what is true masculinity. And it's a great post to ponder that question. And then stay tuned. Later this week, we have a post from Marshall, who is concluding a series that he's been writing about an alpha male friend and just this up and down relationship, including the death of a housemate and how they reconciled with that. So stay tuned for that post from Marshall coming this week to yourotherbrothers.com. Over at the podcast, we do a twice monthly podcast called the Yobcast. And this week we talked about coming out, specifically coming out publicly on a grand scale. And it was me and Elliot, and we brought on Ryan, one of our authors. He's been on a couple podcasts now, and he is publicly out, and he works at a ministry and leads a group. And he talked about it actually on a previous podcast. And we just had a really great, rousing, vulnerable discussion about the pros and cons and the regrets and the advantages and the joys and sorrows of coming out publicly, whether it's through a blog or through a book, as I've done, or just through an intentional ministry position that Ryan has, and just what that means and like how you can do it right, how it's not for everybody, how it might be for you. So if you've ever had those thoughts and questions like, should I just be open about my sexuality? And how do I do that? Where do I begin? Check out the podcast. It might be what you need to hear right now. And I hope you enjoy it. If you have a story to share, please go to yourotherbrothers.com/podcast and find episode 36 coming out publicly. Comment your story, because I love hearing stories about coming out and being vulnerable, sharing your story with people, either small scale or large scale. It doesn't really matter. There's so much power and freedom in sharing your story. So if you have a story to share, you haven't shared it yet, go over to the podcast episode page, share a story. I'd love to read it. And as always, if you enjoy the Yobcast, a simple thing you can do to help us out is go to iTunes, find us, subscribe, rate, and review. We really appreciate it. All right, and now it is time for the mailbag. And I need to bring this up because in the last episode of Manly Monday, someone commented, he will remain nameless, even though you can go back and read it, that maybe instead of bi-weekly or bi-monthly, we should be calling this a semi-monthly, which that is a term I have never heard before. A semi-monthly YouTube show? What is that? And I looked it up, and yeah, technically semi-monthly means twice a month, and that's all it means. Whereas bi-monthly and bi-weekly are kind of vague and transposed, what's the word? They're interchangeable with each other. So it's more vague, I guess. But I don't know, something about semi-monthly just doesn't sit right with me. I don't like it. So that was like the big feedback from the last episode. Feel free to chime in on what you think about bi-weekly, bi-monthly, semi-monthly, knowing full well that I'm going to ignore everything you say because I prefer bi-monthly myself. And I'm the one sitting behind the desk. So anyway, let me know your thoughts on that. You can also shoot us any feedback anytime for the show, mainly Monday at yourotherbrothers.com. Heard from a few people actually last week, so I love getting those emails. If you're watching us in YouTube land, if you're hearing us from the first time, I'd love it if you said hello. I'd love to meet you. And then finally, we have some snail mail to report. For those that have been watching the last few episodes, we've had a bit of a dry spell. I checked the mailbox and it's lonely. The little P.O. box that we have. It's been lonely the last few weeks. However, not this time. We had a fantastic supporter and reader send us not one, but 2 books all about masculinity and brotherhood. And they are the perfect books for like a coffee table, especially a coffee table in the Yob house. Really great. This first one by David Deitcher. It's called Dear Friends, American Photographs of Men Together, 1840 to 1918. And basically, yeah, it's a picture book with lots of words. I wish there were more pictures, actually. But there's a lot of pictures with like men in these old-timey photographs. And some of them are like touching or like putting their arms around each other or whatever. And it wasn't sexual. It was just guys being guys together. In this book, I wanted to bring this one up because this was actually referenced in a recent podcast. It's called, let me make sure I say it right. It's called Picturing Men, A Century of Male Relationships in Everyday American Photography by John Ibsen. Same concept, kind of like exactly the same pictures in the book of just men being men together and not being weird about touching each other and bonding together in the prior century. This book was actually referenced on our part 2 of Physical Touch podcast. And it was mentioned by Richard Padilla, who has a blog, which we've referenced on this show before. And he talked about this book because he's actually met this guy who lives in Southern California, I believe. And so he recommended this book. So I'm excited to actually read it and check out some of the pictures and, have it on my coffee table. Thank you, reader supporter, for sending us these books. If you want to send us books, we've mentioned candy, people have sent us tea. If you want to just send a note or a letter, anything. Who doesn't love opening a mailbox and seeing something that isn't another sparkly envelope credit card offer? Who doesn't love that? Nobody. So if you want to write to us or send us anything, you can go to right here, actually. Your Other Brothers, P.O. Box 843, Asheville, North Carolina, 28802. And yeah, I would love to hear from you in some capacity. And gifts are fun. So that's it, y'all. That is it for Manly Monday this time. As always, if you enjoyed this show, if you enjoy your other brothers and supporting us, all these little simple things add up. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, our YobTube channel. We have over 200 subscribers. Actually, I didn't check that number in a while, and I was surprised. We have over 200 subscribers. That is amazing. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And give our video a thumbs up and comment, as I said, about how you felt like a failure in your spiritual life or in battling sexual temptations, any or all, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I'd love to hear from you. And if you believe in what we're doing with your other brothers, from videos, the podcast, the blogs, to the community we're establishing and building, and you want to support us financially, you can go to patreon.com/yourotherbros. All the information is there, and we just are so grateful for the 100+ people who are supporting us financially every single month. None of this would be possible without y'all. So thank you, Yobbers, for supporting us. So that is it for Manly Monday. This is Tom, and I'm here to remind you to speak meekly and to chase madly, and to be manly, everywhere in between. Just like these guys.